Where this is, fourth or fifth meeting of the statutory working group for Senate Bill 16187. Before we start, we'll go around the room and do introductions. Please state your name and who you represent. My name is Patrick Maroney, the Director of Liquor Enforcement, and we'll go to my right.
Linda Atkins, Attorney General's Office.
Jake Faust, Liquor Enforcement.
Corey Tipton, Liquor Attorney.
Steve Finley, Colorado Beer Distributors Association. Sorry.
Lisa McCann, Consultant, Assistant with the Writing and Final Report. Sandra Loman, Liquor Enforcement. Megan Giannis, Enforcement Division.
Matt Hastings, Governor's Office.
Chuck Carlson with the CLBA. I own a small liquor store.
Adam Staben, Liquor Attorney.
Kristen Thompson, Natural Grocers.
Alan Lewis, Natural Grocers.
Bill Hayes, Target.
Josh Fair with Walmart.
Nick Hoover, Colorado Restaurant Association.
Andrew Lovely, New Belgium Brewing Company.
Bob Hunt, Miller Coors.
Jenny Green, Nashville Spirits.
Doug Caskey, Colorado Wine Board.
Patsy Reese, Diamond Shamrock Store, 7-Eleven.
Heather Brooks, 7-Eleven and Colorado for convenience. Nikki Hackenberger, Wine and Spirit, wholesaler, Colorado.
Tom Already, Southern Glaciers Wine and Spirits.
Kevin Barmer, Colorado Municipal League.
Charlie Summers, Colorado Weekend. This will be Jean McAvoy, CLBA, shortly. She's running a little late. And I'm Bruce Deerking, Hazel's Beverage World, and Coloradans for Safety.
Louis Koski, Department of Revenue.
Ron Cameras out, Department of Revenue.
Perfect time.
A couple of latecomers.
Stephanie Franklin, Television.
Let's go ahead in the back. Anybody in the back there?
Peggy O'Keefe, 7-Eleven.
Patrick Thomas, Total. Robbie Staley, Attorney General's Office.
Jean Robinson, Ledge Liaison for the Department of Revenue.
All right, welcome everybody. Just to understand the way this subgroup is run, there's no formality as far as who can participate. Anyone can. In our formal working group meetings, the working group is able to have discussion. At the end, there's allowed for public comment. This is run differently since it's a subgroup, so equal participation within the subgroup. I want everybody to feel free to be able to ask questions, give comments, and provide feedback. So that's how this is run. If there's some empty spots with the table, the people in the back there, feel free to come up and fill those spots if you'd like to. So with that, we'll get started. I think it was yesterday. I think we sent out the minutes to the meeting, prior meeting. Want to know if any comments or corrections on those minutes that we had from that meeting? Bruce.
I think recognizing the impossibility of drafting minutes that would accurately reflect everything that might be said, and that not everything that's said would necessarily be in agreement with everybody in the group. I would just suggest that be noted on the minutes that they reflect things that were said, but not necessarily things that were agreed upon, because we haven't been holding votes or anything like that, or reflecting any kind of decision making. And so sometimes the minutes include a statement that may have been made by one person that others in the group might not agree with. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't said in the meeting, but I don't think it should be construed as, because it's in the minutes, it's not subject to dispute.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, trying to get every comment. That's why we try to record these, and then we're trying to keep them. When you talk, please talk loudly so the recorder can get it. Hopefully, I know that sometimes it doesn't pick up everybody's comments. We have a microphone if you want to talk to make sure your comments get recorded. And that's when the sure thing is it's on the recording. But yeah, I understand. Is there any as far as correction to the minutes that anybody saw? All right, the first subgroup is the 3-2 beer subgroup, and I think we should start out always by reading what the statute is asking us to do, right? And actually mandating us to do, actually. The state licensing authority shall convene a liquor industry working group to develop an implementation process for grocery and convenience stores to apply for a license to sell malt liquor and fermented malt beverages containing at least 0.5% of alcohol by volume starting January 1st, 2019. The working group shall analyze the impact that removing the alcohol content limit on fermented malt beverages will have on the alcohol beverage industry as a whole, as well as current retail licensees. That's the first part of what this subgroup is looking at. The rest of the statute talks about the next two subgroups that we'll reach out after we're done. So that's really our charge as a working group, I know we've had a lot of discussion on that, and I asked the industry to, get together in between meetings and see what we can do, because there's definitely a discourse of what I think people want. And we need to come up with something, or else the legislature will do it for us without our input. Or our input will be just, everybody disagrees. So, I'm hoping we'll come up with some kind of, resolution to be able to come up with a consensus working group report to give the legislature in January of 2018. I will tell you, in the couple months coming up, next month, we're going to have draft templates for recommendations. We'll send that out to the group and then between now and the next meeting. And I'd like to have some pen on paper when we come to January. We are scheduled to meet every month through the fall. If we can get our work done early, great. We'll stop. We maybe not have to meet every single month, but until we come up with something good, pen on paper, I expect us to meet every month. I know it's going to be a challenge because the legislative season starts next month, so it's going to be a burden on all of us. But at the same time, I think we need to just push forward because of the importance of getting this done, and hopefully within consensus result. So with that, I open up the group again to the 3-2 beer issue. I provided you, I put this, we put on our website, and we sent an email out of a couple grids that the group asked us to do to give somewhat of analysis of the 3-2 versus malt liquor, retail liquor store versus a fermented malt beverage license. And that's these two grids. I think they're also attached on the minutes this morning. And hopefully you had an opportunity to review these to look and see what is the difference between a 3-2 license and a retail liquor store license. What's the difference between how fermented malt beverage is regulated versus malt liquor? Because we all know in January of 2019, those practically they could become synonymous. So, and thanks, Gene, to your group. You gave a lot of good comments, and we responded to make sure it was thoroughly done and added some more information. So I appreciate that. So any comments, or I think this is a pretty good, view of how things are different. Well, for example, on we'll talk about the very top one, malt liquor versus fermented malt beverage. A malt liquor, what's allowed, when it's not allowed. There's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of things that are different. Any comments on this spreadsheet, these grids that you want to point out that would help us understand where to go from here?
I'll jump in, what the heck. I'm assuming that what appear to be more restrictions on malt liquor and retail liquor licenses, as well as liquor licensed drugstores, are there because of the higher alcohol content of the product that's being sold. It would make sense to me that those same restrictions should apply to stores who might be newly selling products with the same alcohol content. So I would suggest that if these restrictions on retail liquor licenses and liquor licensed drugstores make sense and should be continued, that those same restrictions should be applied to convenience stores and grocery stores who might be selling products with the same alcohol content.
Now, last meeting we discussed new licenses versus just a transition to change of definition. I know there's, has anybody had opportunity outside of these meetings to meet and discuss the differences there to maybe come up with some kind of a solution? So I know there's one camp that wants a new application process for anybody selling, fermented malt beverage, which would at that point be, any kind of malt liquor. And there's another camp that just wants to transition, let the definition just change, and that's all. Bruce.
I think SB 197 kind of gives us some direction because it does talk about applying for a license. I think our charge indicates that the intention is there's to be a new license, and I think our job is to come up with what are the parameters for that license and how would it be issued. There's been some conversation about what would be the process to obtain that license, and my sense is there's probably going to be differences among different municipalities as to what they would feel is important and relevant in their community. I know talking with folks in my town in Boulder, there's a strong desire to have public hearings and needs and desires. And so I think one possibility would be to allow local municipalities to make that decision whether or not to require that. And if there are municipalities that don't want needs and desires and don't want hearings, they would have the ability to not require that.
So what exactly, again, Bruce, are the items that you think the locals should have discretion?
Well, I think whether or not to have a public hearing and whether or not to require needs and desires for the issuance of this new license. At a minimum, I think that should be permitted. I don't think we should adopt or recommend the legislature adopt a statutory regime that would prohibit a municipality that wanted to have those processes from having them.
From 7-Eleven's perspective and from, I know I talked to Jason at Comico and we talked to him and her client, we certainly do not think that we need to have another hearing. And we do believe that the agreement was when this compromise was put together was that it would be a automatic conversion. And I've also reached out to several municipal mayors and folks in the cities, and they do not want, they believe we already have had a hearing and don't need a second one.
Would
That's
it-
clearly not the case everywhere. I think we should give the municipalities the freedom to decide for themselves.
Would this be for existing licenses that have a fermented malt beverage license when it convert, or would this be for any brand new license?
It would be for both. I think 197 indicates that there is to be a new license type. I think that's what we're talking about doing, is creating a new license type that allows the sale of full-strength beer. And what that process looks like, how simple or complex it is, I think is going to be different in different municipalities. The chair of the Boulder BLA, with respect to the concept of automatic conversion, said in a public hearing, we would never allow that to happen. I think there's a strong desire, particularly in college towns, to take a look at the public safety implications, and that it shouldn't be our recommendation that we strip municipalities from having that freedom.
Is there anything in 197 that prevents a municipality from holding a needs and desires hearing once this goes into effect as it's written?
Well, the way the 197 is written now, there is no,
Requirement. All it does is
well,
change the.
there's no process even. There's actually no process whatsoever.
So it's the department's theory that we would need to change it or add to the law in order to allow that process to occur.
Yeah, you would.
Well, I guess since everyone's speaking for municipalities, I will, since I represent them. I know that there are varying opinions among folks in terms of licensing authorities, citizen appointed licensing authorities, et cetera. Here's the feedback I've got thus far, is that licenses that were issued under the laws that existed at the time should not have to come back through and check and see if they can still have their license. One of the things we discussed before that has come up is whether or not distance restrictions that apply to every Article 47 license should be retrospectively or prospectively applied to fermented malt beverage licenses. The feedback I'm getting so far is that in terms of retrospective, no, but prospectively, maybe. And previous meetings, is to create the new license that's in Article 47, but anyone who's already got their license doesn't have to re-up and start from scratch again. So that's where I think the municipal league is coming out on behalf of our members at this point. I don't know that with everything that was going on in the last days of the session, anyone can say with absolute clarity what intent was around very specific things. I can tell you that from the municipal league's perspective, we were on the outside looking in. We would have loved to have had some say as to municipal interests on all of this stuff, but that being said, I think there's still plenty of opportunity to get it right.
I would think that the intent is pretty clear based on what Patrick read, an implementation process to apply for a license. I don't think that's unclear at all.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just
Yeah.
trying to be Solomon-like? I actually think Bruce's concept is fine. There's going to be a dispute here. You all know that. Let's sort of cut away the political stuff. Leave it to the municipalities. Leave it to the local authorities. Why not?
To do what? To decide?
Decide whether they want needs and desires, decide what level of hearing they want.
But it needs and desires to do what, Jim? Because that's important. Because to determine whether or not someone who has an existing license gets to keep it.
Or can convert to that's subject to keep it or convert to the beer license.
Well, there's no the conversion's already built into the statute. I know what was quoted about the apply for a new license, but the conversion's already built in that as of January 1, 2019, you can sell full strength beer.
Kevin, I understand we're just gonna go back and forth, but we'll never agree. So what I'm trying to say is, and I'm not disagreeing with you either, and I'm not agreeing with you. I'm just saying everyone's gonna look at it differently, and everyone has different agendas here. So what I'm saying is, let's resolve this one. We can resolve this one, I believe, rather quickly by saying, local authority, decide. You want to be an easy, I just think it's just I'm not looking for an easy solution. I'm looking for a workable solution.
Now, this is
Why would that not be workable?
Because then you, instead of resolving the issue in one stop where it should be done in this case, you're pushing that out to every local licensing authority and every municipal clerk and attorney that has to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. That's not solving the problem. That's pushing it out to every municipality and county in the state.
But if the local authority doesn't want to do that, we're empowering them to say, we're not doing that.
So in one municipality, they could make the determination that convenience stores don't get to keep their license, and then the next municipality, they can go a different direction. I mean, I love local control, but that's got trouble written all over it.
But liquor law says it now, consistency is a hobgoblin of small lines. And so, that's the way it's gonna be. I'm just trying to find a way to resolve it. I hear what you're saying. I know exactly what Bruce is saying. I know what CLBA believes in. I know what I think. And we're all gonna have different views of it because we're all working it through our own little prisms.
All right.
Or prisons, whatever the case may be. But I'm trying to find some middle ground that makes it doable. And I just think that this is a very Solomon-like solution to the problem.
But I'm telling you that that a non-starter is putting into municipalities or counties' hands the responsibility to determine if someone who has a legitimately approved license gets to keep the license. That's a non-starter.
So what if you do it just the ability to convert?
Convert to what?
To the full strength beer.
It's already in the statute.
Yeah,
You're right.
Hold on, guys. Several people have their hands raised here. So there's an automatic conversion. That's correct. There's nothing to convert to. So Bruce.
Actually, we're talking around a fundamental dispute about what the law says. And so if we're not gonna be able to get past that, this working group's not gonna accomplish anything, and we can just all go back to the legislature and argue our individual positions. as one of the people that was actually inside the room, I can tell you there was never any discussion or intention that it was gonna be an automatic conversion. We almost had it worked out and we ran out of time. And so what's baked into the statute is that this group is supposed to come up with the implementation process to apply for a new license that would be a full strength beer license. And there was even discussion at the time about calling it a packaged beer license. And so that's the reality of what we're supposed to be doing. And it's not, it's misstating it to say we're gonna, whether or not we're gonna take away someone's license. I mean, the reality is the 3-2 licensees and others who felt strongly about this wanted 3-2 beer to go away. And they wanted to have an opportunity to be able to sell full strength beer upon parameters that had to be worked out. So we're here to work out those parameters. And people that are locked into, oh, it's just gonna happen automatically and whatever the rules for 3-2 have to apply and we'll get to sell every malt liquor we want. If you believe the legislature is gonna do that, then again, we're never gonna accomplish anything in this group. I think the reality is that they're two very different products. And I know that at least for my city, and maybe you feel like I shouldn't be speaking for my city, Kevin, but I can tell you there is a high level of concern about having malt liquor sold at every place that has a 3-2 license. And at a minimum, the community wants to take a look at it. Now, CML's position is that municipalities should be prohibited from reviewing whether or not 3-2 licensees should get to become malt liquor stores. I think some of your members are not gonna agree with that position. Personally, I believe that at least communities that wanna have that level of review should be allowed. Needs and desires about citizens having the chance to say what they want or don't want in their neighborhood and in their community. And I don't believe it's the role of this group to say we don't want that kind of public input. I think at the end of the day, the vast majority of 3-2 licensees will get the new license. I think that will be the right decision, and I do think that's the intent. But it doesn't mean it was supposed to happen without any review or without any new rules being established.
I believe the negotiation was an automatic conversion. Having been in the room and talking with the convenience store, that was it. And we moved the date twice, maybe 3 times. We looked at coolers, we looked at everything. So I do believe that at the end of the day, the automatic conversion was the reason why we made the deal at the end, because we wanted an end date. We knew that there was going to be 2 years of working on it to try to figure out some of the things around it, but it was an automatic conversion. And that was the negotiation.
Okay, I'll,
Remember, if we had a ballot title,
yeah.
same thing.
Okay, we wanna make sure we keep order here. If you wanna be heard, please, because we have a lot of people here, please raise your hand, look at me, and I'll go ahead and call on you. Gene next, and then I'll go to Adam.
My question is, who did you negotiate that with? Because you didn't negotiate that with the liquor stores. We never, ever, ever agreed to an automatic conversion, period. And I said that until I'm blue in the face, and I won't stop saying it, because that is the case. We did not negotiate that parameter of Senate Bill 197. Maybe somebody else did, but I can tell you the liquor stores did not.
Okay, Adam.
Yeah, that following up on Kevin's comment, I would agree with Kevin that I think unlike marijuana, where you do have the local option where they can govern how they deem necessary, alcohol is a statewide concern, and I think, I was not there in part of the legislative discussions occurring, but I think what the legislature wanted in my mind was to have an open dialogue to figure out what's best for the state as a whole, and you're not gonna get a concurrence in a unanimous decision on that. There are gonna be some issues that I think other jurisdictions may say, okay, but this is the law and this is what we have to do. I agree with Kevin, to punt it down to the locals, we're not accomplishing anything here. And I think that's the purpose of the statutory work group, is to deal with it on a statewide basis and have an overplay throughout the entire state.
From a state licensing standpoint, since alcohol is a statewide concern, you have to have those standards that are across the board for everybody to play in. The sandbox is the same. Locals do have some discretion in certain areas of the law to make their decision, but they're few. All the locals have to follow state law, and it's the same whatever jurisdiction it's in. So that way you have consistency across the state on how alcohol is regulated. Kevin.
I guess what this conversation just shows me resolved at the State House or the bill's gonna stand pat. The language is gonna stand pat, and if people disagree on what it says, they can deal with it that way, but I can't in good conscience say that if people don't agree on what they agreed to, that they're gonna take that fight to 268 of my members. No way.
Bruce, go ahead.
I was just gonna point out, there are some differences among municipalities, and we do allow cities to have some judgments with it, understanding alcohol is a matter of statewide concern, and I'm not suggesting we allow jurisdictions to create their own separate license parameters. We're just talking about opting in or out of public hearing and needs and desires. In Boulder, for example, we have public hearings on renewals sometimes. If you don't submit your renewal by your due date, you get to have a public hearing on whether or not your license is renewed. Why do we do that? Some people may think because it's Boulder has too much process, but we're in a college town. We had a young man die from alcohol poisoning a couple years ago. We take it very seriously. Some people think it's a big joke. We don't happen to think that. We think that it's important that the community has a chance to look carefully at how and where alcohol is sold. And I can just tell you, if we come back and recommend that this is all just gonna happen and it's gonna be fine and we can have malt liquor stores anywhere and everywhere, including right across the street from the high school, there are going to be people in my community who disagree with that. And I'm suggesting that we should not prohibit municipalities from having an appropriate level of process to make these kind of decisions that are right for their community.
Just for the record, the renewal hearing is not public, but it is a hearing that can be held on a renewal license, but it's not a needs and desires hearing.
It's not needs and desires, but it is a public hearing, actually.
It's also limited to conduct of the establishment. You know, if there's been any activity, sale, minor, et cetera, whether or not they need to keep it. That's correct.
I understand the differences here. We have about 25 minutes left till we go to the next subgroup. What I would like to move the discussion to now is, we need to, you guys need to get together outside this meeting to try to solve some of these differences. Say we are able to solve those differences as far as conversion, license, whatever. Now let's take a look at if there was a new application for a license, whether it needs and desires, whatever. What does that license look like? Are we going to create a new license type called, like Bruce said during the discussion, was a box store liquor license or a box store beer license? That's the next part. Okay, we get past this discussion of how we get one. What's it going to look like? Where's it going to be? Is it going to be in Article 46 or in Article 47? How is it going to be regulated? That's another hurdle we have to look at here. In early discussions, I knew there was like limitations on the number of coolers, number of doors you can have, stuff like that. So let's open that up. Say we have a new license called a box store license. What's it look like? I need input. Not so fast.
Well, I'll be the first, again, not being there, but if someone was saying it was gonna convert to full strength, I think we'd assume that these establishments that do have a 3-2 license have a vast majority of sales above and beyond a 20% level that a retail liquor store would have. So just throwing that out there, non-products, non-alcohol products, either through gas, through the convenience food, or whatever it is. So I think that was probably an understanding to begin with, that I think putting a limitation on other products that they could sell would be a non-starter because, and again, I wasn't there, and if someone has any direct understanding, please let me know. But to put a cap on any kind of non-alcohol product, what can be sold there, or percentage thereof, I think would eliminate the whole entire understanding of it just being converted in 2015, subject to the recommendations here.
So that's what it won't look like. What would it look like? Kevin?
Well, so I'll just repeat something that I threw out before, and this is not, there's not an objection certainly to creating a new type of license, but that ability, and then, like the statute says now, the ability to reduce or eliminate the distance restriction.
For new ones, talking about
For new ones.
for new ones that didn't exist before. So what would this license look like then? That wasn't the discussions either, so what were some of the comments made during the 197 era on what this maybe license could look like? I know there was limitation on possible number of doors, number of cooler doors you had. That was one possibility. Square foot. Help me out here. Throw ideas out. Let's discuss that.
I'll try. Again, Kristen Thompson with Natural Grocers. Currently, Natural Grocers does not have 3-2, something, that they're considering. There's because there's no pharmacy, in a number of those size grocery stores or specialty groceries, the only license available to them would be a fermented malt beverage, or whatever it becomes. This is, not knowing much about this, do tiers and consider the size of the store and then what the limitations are, so convenience stores don't automatically turn into a beer store. And large grocery doesn't take, sections and become a specialty beer store. What does that look like across the board, understanding that there are only certain kinds of stores in the state that can sell beyond beer? Are there tiers?
I mean, there's not now necessarily, but you look at the
Yeah, I know
look
there
look
aren't
at the
now.
grid that we that we have on the retail liquor store versus the 3-2 beer license and the liquor license drugstore, what they can and cannot do, what can be sold, hours of sales, age of employees, being allowed to deliver, doing tastings, restricted days, ID requirements and items sold. And there's more. 500-foot rule, needs and desires, trade practice and laws, financial interest, fees, and how many you can own. They are definitely a different type of license right now, and things do change when you allow malt beverage, malt liquor, and yeah, they do. So.
No, I'm saying, like, as we move forward, is that one of the considerations that we would look at?
As far as limiting the amount of product or square footage group?
Or doing tiers of square footage?
Or categories. I hate to say the word tier. Sorry. That's a trade practice joke, but Bruce.
Yeah, I'd just say to Adam's point, I mean, he's correct that I think the discussion, it was sort of the reverse of the retail liquor store discussion. It's not that a packaged beer licensee would be prohibited from selling other items. It's that there would be some limit on how much beer is being sold because it's supposed to be accessory to some other principal business, and not that we're trying to create a new malt liquor store category and have thousands of new businesses springing up to be malt liquor stores. So that's correct. And in terms of the discussions last spring, at least, there was discussion of having two different sets of standards based on the size of store.
And lest we also forget the wonderful 3-2 on-off license. Let's not forget about that. We're not talking just about packaged stores here. As we mentioned in the last meeting we had, where we gave some statistics, I didn't bring in this time, unfortunately, but last time we talked about how many 3-2 on-offs we have, where you drink on the premises 3-2 and then take a 6-pack to go. We have to consider that into this as well, because there's an on-premise touch here that maybe wasn't necessarily contemplated when you discussed 187.
Weren't there like 8
No,
of those?
like 20s, 50, something like that. Yeah.
Jay Hicks, Representative Cummings, I think a lot of the discussions that we had didn't include any limitations of space or, I think we brought up cooler doors initially, but I think that was tabled based on logistics and, different business models for different places. So I think that was tabled for discussion, and that's sort of, I think, where a lot of the convenience stores still fall is, I think they may entertain an ABV limit, but I don't think they're gonna entertain anything that relates to cooler doors or square footage or sales, at this point in time, based on what I know, so.
If you could devise the best package store license, what would you like it to see? Give me some input. So you now individually here, you have the ability to create your own package store license. What would you like it to look like? I'm trying to get some input here. Limitations, abilities. It's obvious here. Let's bring out the open. It's obvious that liquor stores don't want convenience stores to become liquor stores, and convenience stores don't want, everybody doesn't want everybody to have that same ability, and they're different now. What do they look like in the future? It's going to be different. We know that. So if you had the ability to create your own box store license, what would you want it to look like? Who here wants the limited number of doors? To be able to limit the number of doors you can have malt beverage products in. I'm trying to get some discussion, people. We're not going anywhere here, so help me out.
Aren't we supposed to get information on other states and how they do this?
It's all across the board. There's some states going through what we're going through right now too, so.
Well, I'll just throw it out there to start the conversation. I think any limitations are imposed by a modification of premise, is it not? To be able to say, if you're now willing to say that we have two doors of beer, we now wanna go to 4 doors of beer, would that be a modification of premise, that at which time you can have the locals decide whether or not you expand your selection? I don't know, just throwing it out there. Or if the whole place is licensed, theoretically, you're allowed to, but anytime you materially modify the premise, you're required to
Right.
file with the locals. The locals can have a needs and desires hearing on that if they determine they wanted to.
Adam, can you clarify that? I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Supers is which is something
Yeah, no, so
asking
it-
outside, but.
Yeah, so I'm just throwing that out there to say that maybe one way to resolve that is that if, for example, a location wants to go from 2 aisles to 6 aisles of alcohol, then would there be a needs and desires hearing required? I think that's a local level determination, that some local jurisdictions would say, no, we're fine with it, or others would say, no, we want a hearing. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there to start the conversation.
Right.
I don't know of too many municipalities that want to get into the level of business of how many doors any type of license establishment has. Create the standard. If it's yes, on the modification of premises, if someone changes their license, premises modifies, that's subject to review by the state and local authorities. But in terms of saying you want to go from 2 to 6 or whatever, locals, that's not something that the licensing authorities set the standard in the statute and make it applicable statewide.
Is your desire to limit the amount of alcohol sold at a box store license, percentage-wise?
Percentage of sales, percentage of alcohol.
Percentage of sales? Like we talked about the opposite of the retail liquor store who can only have 20% non-alcohol. Do you apply something like that to a box store where only % can be alcohol? someone mentioned that, so I throw that out there.
May I just ask a question on behalf of,
Go ahead.
again, Kroger King Supers on that? When this was discussed in 197, it was conversion of beer. Beer became beer.
Right.
Can you
Can I
just a little
finish
bit
my
louder?
topic? Can I just
Yeah,
finish
but
my
if I could hear
comment?
it, sure.
Yeah, speak up, speak up.
Okay, when this was contemplated last session on a license, a current license, beer becoming from 3.2 to full strength, that was the concept, and that was what was put on the table. It wasn't a new type of percentage.
No,
for
I'm
the
not,
stores.
I'm just
So-
trying to get some dialogue here going,
Right.
because.
But
I
we
mean,
were led to believe this whole exercise is going to be implementation of 197 within the 4 quarters of 197. And that's, I guess I'm just putting out there what I
So,
thought we were
so what would you like,
discussing.
what would it look like to you then?
Conversion is conversion. Like, the shelf space that we have is now the choice of these grocers. It may be Corona, it may be Coors, it may be Craft Brew. It's conversion. Their license converts to full-strength beer.
Would it be a new
Selling.
license type, or would it be the same license?
No, same license, it's, the beer that we sell under our current license is now more controlled by what our consumers walk into a store in Yuba or Denver or Cherry Creek or Brookfield want, like green chili or anything else that we're selling.
Okay. Did everybody hear that?
Not entirely.
The idea was that it just converts.
I'm sorry, I just don't speak out loud. For a King Soopers, I think I can speak for Safeway because they're not here today, that when this converts to beer being beer, the decisions that we're making about how much or what type we are selling is on a store by store, it's on a consumer basis, and it's different in every market. So when we convert to beer, we're making different decisions depending on the market that we're serving, depending on the area of the state, depending on who we're trying to please in the store.
Jim?
But that's the point I think that I was trying to make earlier. Jackie, you addressed what the needs of the consumer, of the community, as you just said, and that's what goes back to my point that I was making to Kevin, that, let's try to come up with a solution, which is leave it to the municipalities or the local authorities to decide about the conversion issue.
But I've never heard CML say that they want every municipality to have to get back into the market at every store.
They don't have to. They don't have to. That's what I'm saying. They don't have to. They can make that decision, but we're not foreclosing that decision to them. We're not gonna foreclose it. We give them the opportunity. So if you're in the Republic of Boulder, and you wanna do it there, great. If you're in the city and county of Denver, you
But
don't
what do
wanna
they
do it.
have now? What do we do? I guess, we just considered this to be, it was conversion of beer is now beer in 2019. So if beer was now beer under current law, what locals have the ability to do now? They wouldn't have. to-
Nothing.
Nothing.
But they're not asking for additional authority.
Well, I don't know if they are or not. I mean, I understand, Kevin and I go back a long way together. We were good friends. I hear exactly what he's saying, and what I'm saying is, if they don't wanna do it, they don't have to. But give them the opportunity, is what I'm saying. And
What I
that's
said
also-
earlier is there's a lot of folks who want to give us the opportunity, instead of resolving it at the state level or leaving it as is, to take that debate to every municipality. And you are correct, Mary Kay, that is not something that currently asking for.
But I'm trying to help you.
So, but, again, what I'm trying to do here is, I know we're not gonna resolve that in the next 10 minutes, but I wanna, in the last 10 minutes of discussion of, okay, we have a new license now. Conversion's over, done with. Someone wants to apply for a license on January 2nd, 2019 to sell malt liquor / fermented malt beverage. What does that license look like? New license, brand new license, new building, new everything.
Patrick?
Yeah.
In order to answer that question, I know there was not total agreement on this at an earlier meeting, but, do we generally agree that barring no change in the statute, that on January 2nd, 2019, someone comes in and applies for a fermented malt beverage license and can sell full-strength beer?
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Under Article 46, just like if they did it on the
Yes.
exact same license, just what they could sell is only going changes.
Correct. So, and I'm not saying we all maybe agree that it should be a new license type, but I'm trying to have that discussion. If there was a new license type, what would it look like? Maybe we can get, if we get that, maybe we can figure out the conversion model.
I was interested in something I heard back here, that there's not absolute opposition to creating an upper limit on ABV. And maybe if you combine that with a, for lack of a better term, making it a beer-only license, and changing the name for ferment malt beverage, beer-only license in Article 47, may be subject to distance restrictions, but will go through all the same processes as any other new license with a cap on the ABV, then, maybe that's a starting point.
Would that be for the ones that are current and also they would convert to that, or is it just new?
Except for the distance restriction part, they could convert to that without at their renewal.
Brewers, I need you to speak up as far as upper, if there was an upper ABV limit.
I think anything over 25 is fine with us. If your cap is at 25 or higher. The problem is, once we start talking about ABV, then we're getting into testing, which is onerous.
And labeling. And labeling.
Right. So I think that we would not be forward with it.
I've got to ask, 25 for beer, as a former brewer that's a distiller, that's a pretty high ABV.
We were joking.
So, Alan Lewis, Natural Grocers, just in terms of tiers and restrictions and cases and square footage, I don't speak for all small grocers, but we have 10,000 square foot grocery stores, 40 of them in the state. I know a lot of the other grocers who are in similar situations, especially in rural Colorado. We feel very strongly that reducing the ability of a small grocery store to participate in this market is just anti-competitive. I wasn't involved directly in the negotiations, but I do know that when we pass laws, it's for the good of all citizens. And in this case, those smaller grocers around the state that are hanging on are facing competition from very large big boxes with no restrictions on the products that they sell. And so they're creating these tiers and artificially suppressing a grocery store's ability to sell these products doesn't make sense to me. And, just for the record, we're not rushing to get any licenses here. It's not something that we're advocating for our own pocketbook. We do advocate for the smaller independent grocers. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
And while I've got the floor, Kevin, I feel your pain about kicking this, down to the municipalities. And 9 out of 10 times, you're right. The disconnect here is that 1 out of 10 times you're completely wrong, and you're creating this massive problem for Fort Collins, for Fort Lewis, for Boulder, for Alamosa, where the local authorities are going to have to deal with a doubling of the number of outlets with really big problems with distance. So I can tell where you're not. I feel your pain, but the pain's going to come to certain jurisdictions anyway. So dealing with that now might be really helpful. Thanks.
Hey Patrick, could I make a comment as an observer, since as a distiller I don't really have a dog in this fight?
I think, yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I think that everyone needs to be very careful of as we move forward with all these types of issues, especially when we're talking about influencing local jurisdictions, is the increase in the administrative burden on anybody involved. I mean, it's great to have a say in what's going on, but if you don't have the resources to manage that additional administrative burden, all you're going to do is harm the businesses and the municipalities or local licensing authorities that are in the mix. So as we go forward, there are lots of people in here that say we want to have a voice, but the logistics and the administrative burden to support that voice may not be there. I mean, just my 2 cents.
Well, it's 10 o'clock. We have 2 more subgroups to get through before noon. What I suggest would be we go to the next subgroup, and if we have time before noon, if we get done, the 2 subgroups are done before that, we circle back. And because we have a lot more work to do on this. What I would ask you to do between now and the next meeting is, again, those who oppose or have opposition, please, communicate with each other to see if there's anything we can do. Because doing nothing has consequences. Without changing the law, I'm not saying they're bad, they have consequences. Changing it has consequences. They're both, just like 187. Passing it had consequences, not letting it pass had consequences, right? And we all had to give up, I'm sorry, I'm not going to put myself in we because I'm not part of it. You all had to give up something to get to 187 done. Not any one person in this room was cheering that they got everything they wanted from 187.
You've been talking Finley lately, have you?
You notice I've been turning my head this way? Just kidding. So, I just suggest that we look at that going forward, because I know from my standpoint, I mentioned this last time, we do have some issues on the top 2 tiers when it comes to the manufacturer and the wholesale of 3.2. That's something that I have to bring to the table. And brewers, I mentioned to you guys again, and I don't mind having a conversation with you, and wholesalers, wherever we went there, Mickey and Steve, on how the 3.2 is going to affect wholesaling and manufacturing. That's a whole other thing that I don't think was even talked about initially in 197, but it does affect it. If you create this model to where malt liquor and fermented beverage are the same, do we still need 2 separate licenses to make the same exact product? I wouldn't think you'd want that. So,
To answer that, we have other states where we sell 3.2, so we're gonna want the ability to be able to still make it here, even if it's not sold in Colorado. So, I don't know if that means there needs to be a change, or if we keep the current 3.2 manufacturing license the way it is. But we're willing to have that conversation, but I do want the ability to still manufacture it.
well, yeah, what happens here is and I understand what you're saying. I totally understand that you still need ability to create a 3.2 product. And 197 doesn't make 3.2 go away. People keep on saying it's going away. No, the market will determine alcohol content being sold. But I keep on saying I'm a 3.2 beer drinker. At times, not all the time, but I do if I'm, because I like the low alcohol content. So, but what the problem is okay. So you have, if nothing changes, you still have a fermented malt beverage license retail and a malt liquor retail. In order to sell as a manufacturer to the fermented malt beverage, you would need a fermented malt beverage manufacturer license, because you're not making malt liquor. Its definitions, they're the same. They're still defined as 2 separate products. Therefore, they still need to go through that. So if you're a small brewer in Colorado that's just starting up, you need 2 separate licenses to sell to your same product. You understand what I'm saying here? So it does create issues. So I'd like to have a discussion with the Brewers Guild and Belgian, Miller Coors, you guys. We'll do that between this meeting and next meeting to determine what that can look like. So, anything before we go on to the next subgroup? I appreciate everybody's discussion, and we'll continue on. I hand it over to Ron Camerzell.
All right, we're going to start with the 3-tier working group, and just a reminder, under Senate Bill 197, it talked about shall consider other legislative, regulatory, or administrative changes necessary to promote the 3-tiered distribution system in Colorado. And at the last meeting, we tried to come up with some topics for the group to go back and discuss amongst your industry sectors and then come back to this meeting and have some further discussion. And we sent out some of those topics for further discussion in advance of the meeting. So I'm just going to go down the list of them and just open it up for comment. Again, this is this piece of the legislation was pretty broadly written, and so it really is an opportunity for us to make some, pretty substantive recommendations to the General Assembly that will be included in the report. So as I've said before, this is your golden opportunity to get some things out on the table that you think could improve the three-tiered system, and it's pretty broad. So I'm just going to start going down the list. So the first one was, when does the manufacturing process conclude? And I think that was a topic that was raised at our last meeting. And is there benefit to further clarifying that or making some recommendations to the General Assembly on that? So I'll just open it up to the group, and I'm not sure who brought that comment forward at the last meeting, but I'll just open it up. So the concept is, when does the manufacturing process conclude, and what kinds of things can we discuss about that? Doug?
I think that was one of the topics that I might have brought up, but the issue was clarifying that until the product is ready to be sold to the consumer, it is still being manufactured.
No, not necessarily. It's at rest.
I'm sorry, Mickey, I didn't hear what you said.
Can you buy an unlabeled product?
No.
That's what I'm talking about, Mickey. If you have it in your possession, it should be ready to sell to the consumer. If it is unlabeled, if it does not have a capsule on it, if it, for whatever reason, is not ready to sell to the consumer, it's still being manufactured.
I just think you need to somehow reference that incremental step in between, because if you don't, you're going manufacture to consumer. And we're about promoting the three-tiered system.
Could you talk louder, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mickey, we can't hear you at all down here. I apologize.
I can hear you perfectly.
So Doug, let me explore that a little bit. So from the perspective of the wine industry, what kinds of, can you give some examples of where it's still in the manufacturing process from your perspective, and it
The tangible example, the real hands-on, hit the pocketbook example, was when the division attempted to impose excise tax on the sale of bulk wine, saying that is the first sale in Colorado. Bulk wine is in no way ready to be sold to the consumer or to the wholesaler.
Nor is bulk spirit.
Nor is bulk spirit, and therefore, to tax it at that point would have created a bookkeeping nightmare for the division and the manufacturer. So I think that's one example where, no, it is, first sale happens when the product is ready to sell to the consumer. We can define that sale as a sale to a wholesaler or a retailer or a consumer as allowed under the statutes, but first sale doesn't happen until the product is in a condition that it could legally be sold to the consumer.
Isn't that the same as TTB, right? Like having bonded and tax paid, isn't that the same?
Probably.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so it's.
Yeah.
I think the trigger, and this is speaking for the distillers, should be the point where federal excise and for that matter, state excise tax is paid.
Right.
And, distilleries typically do that when it leaves the bonded space. There's various ways of doing it, but at that point, it has to have a legal label, a legal cork, a legal seal, and at that point, it is ready for wholesale sale. Now, it can be ready for wholesale sale, but not leave the bonded space, and therefore, tax hasn't been paid. that happens all the time. But at that point, I would view it as still being under manufacture until that trigger, which is tax payment, occurs.
Yes, I would just, and I'm not sure how this will impact it, but, bond is going away for small wineries.
And for small distilleries,
Okay,
bond is going away, but bonded space is not.
Right.
So it's still leaving bonded space. All that is going away is the payment of a bond for federal bond for producers producing small amounts. But bonded space is still a federal requirement, and licensed space is still a state requirement. So when tax is paid as the goods leave that space, that would be, in my mind, when manufacturing is finished and the goods are now wholesalable and they move forward.
Which I think, and this came up several years ago about trying to align state regulations and statute with federal regulations and statute. And I think this would be one of the most critical if the state would recognize bond, tax paid bond, not tax paid. If we would recognize those areas and that definition the way the federal government does, it would make it a lot easier for manufacturers who are now trying to keep, two different sets of timelines, if you will, of where this is on the federal timeline and where this product is on the state timeline.
And I don't think that's that big a deal, really, in
Well,
practice.
it creates a little confusion about when the taxes get paid, but it would be helpful, I think, if the state adopted that same kind of policy.
So you're talking about the taxes then paid when it come out of bond?
I'm talking about recognizing the bonded area, tax paid, not tax paid, yes.
Okay, I know there's a lot of federal guidelines on that bond area, sometimes can be mobile in transit. So those are the things that we haven't had before, that I'm willing to take a look at, if that's something that, I mean, I can understand the disparity between state excise tax and federal excise tax and when it's paid and how it's paid, not how, but when it's paid. I'm willing to look at that. I don't know all the implications of that because I don't deal like you do with the bonded areas. Whether it's the same as your licensed premises, it's probably not. It's probably
It's
smaller.
It's
It's
smaller.
a smaller footprint than that. So I'm willing to look at that.
I'm not sure we wanna go down that rabbit hole with this. I think, it could bear looking at down in the future. But I think, we're talking about when manufacture ends. And for both federal and state, essentially, when we package that good for wholesale and it leaves our premises, that's the taxable action. And so when tax is paid, I think that's when, on a finished good, when our excise tax is paid, that should be when manufacturing ends. And prior to that, it's still under manufacturing.
And Doug, has there been some situation or problem that warrants further clarifying or defining this?
As I said,
And
the division tried to collect excise tax.
On bulk wine.
On bulk wine. Now, that was a previous administration, it might have actually been 2 administrations ago, but because it was never put in writing, we have no guidelines to go by.
Right, but they ultimately didn't collect it, right? They just tried, or?
I don't remember the resolution of that. I think it went to a hearing, or, I'm not sure, I don't know how.
Is that something you may be comfortable putting in rule?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Definition of when a product is considered manufactured?
I think it'd be appropriate. I don't think it needs to be in statute.
Yeah, no, I
But
don't think it does either.
I think it needs to tie to a logical trigger, and I think the payment of excise tax is the logical trigger. We pay tax when the stuff is finished being produced and is ready for wholesale. And at that point, it leaves our premises and goes to wholesalers or goes to retailers under, where applicable under statute.
Or your own sales room.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Well, but even there though, that's still part of their distillery license. That sales room is still part of their distillery license, so
But when
it's
that-
not leaving.
When that.
But it leaves bond into tax pay.
Well, no, it's, So for example, in my distillery, for Colorado purposes, the bottles we sell in the tasting room, when we sell them, they count as being sold and we pay tax at that
Right.
point. You know, we can pull those back prior to that out of the sales room if we need to change a label or modify something. We can't once that excise tax is paid, it's gone. So
There are, I believe, some wineries who actually remove the wine from bond into a sales room
Well,
inventory.
so
Right.
federal we have to, and that's why I'm saying, I think state excise tax makes, since it's a state rule, state excise tax would be logical.
Well, there's two things we're talking about. We're talking about tax and we're talking about
Well, I'm
the
saying.
the
act-
definition of what's manufactured.
Saying the act of paying tax is the final act of manufacture, is what I'm proposing. Once that tax is paid, it's manufactured, it's in commerce. Prior to that being paid, it cannot be in commerce, so it's still in the manufacturing process.
Well, the one issue I have with that, and I'm just, again, this is just quick analyzing, is the reason why we define manufacturers when it's consumer ready is because then when it's in a bottle, sealed and everything, you're not able to sell that as a bulk product to somewhere. And
But you're not able to pay tax on it either.
Well, hold on for a second. But so you're not able to sell that to a brewery to use in some kind of a brewing process. You know, you can't do that because it's a manufactured product already,
good.
right? And then you can't sell it to a brewery as a sealed container because they're now buying a manufactured product. But if you're not saying it's manufactured, then they might be able to do that, and that's not the case. So there's a lot of things to think about. But I'm open to discussion. I'm not. You know what? My desire is to make it simple, so everybody knows the rules, and it's simple to pay the excise tax. They know when it's paid,
Well-
and then second of all, when is it considered manufactured?
You can't put a legal label and capsule on a alcohol beverage and sell it without paying tax on it. It's against the law. So again, I think the tax is the trigger. I mean, you can't say I'm selling it to another licensee in a final bottle unless it has no label and no capsule, because then they would need to label it, and
Exactly.
so, I mean, there's, maybe we need to define.
Because I don't want bulk product to be treated the same as consumer ready product.
No, this has gotta be a product ready to enter commerce.
Right. Same. Yeah. Consumer ready.
It's gotta be ready in a state that is ready to enter commerce and go to a wholesale or to another legally authorized sales channel.
And Patrick, to that point, all that bulk stuff is transferred in bond.
Right. Yeah. Federally.
Right,
Yeah. And
right.
we don't mess with it statewide. We don't tax it on the state side.
Well, except for the tax-paid bottling house.
Right. Which we have one of them.
Yeah. Yes, but we have a license on the books, so.
Yeah. Well, no, I understand. Yeah, but that's something totally different, though. Because it is tax paid. It's actually federally and state tax paid wine. You're right. Because
Which is-
the manufacturer's paying that, not the bottling house.
When it is transferred to the bottling house, the state taxes are paid.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So that I think would cloudy using the payment of tax as the delimitation. Again, it goes back to, is it ready to go into commerce?
Okay.
Okay, so what I've got here in my notes is the concept of consumer ready, sealed container labeled, excise tax paid except for a tax paid bottling house. Maybe we create an exception for that. Have those standards, but say for a tax paid bottling house, that excise tax paid would not necessarily apply.
Doesn't that just complicate it?
I don't know.
Yeah,
You know what I'm,
I
but
mean,
you
I was
gotta
trying to
carve
get
out,
it.
yeah.
And again, I don't know, I have a feeling currently with the one tax-paid bottling house license, the product going through there is coming from out of state. And
Right.
therefore, that may be creating entirely different dynamics.
Yeah, because there's no state tax on that pay.
State tax would, yeah, would have already been paid wherever the state is, whatever.
The other state, yeah, nothing in Colorado, yeah.
Well, let's stick with the seal container and label concept right now.
Ready to enter commerce.
Yeah, ready to enter commerce. And
So-
then, I also have here that it's probably something we can do in rule. It doesn't really necessarily need to fit in statute.
So the next question then is, what happens if somebody then needs to do a label change or something along those lines, which does happen? I mean, that's, because that's, it's still pre-tax, we can still change labels, but that's still manufacturing.
I think federally you have more of an issue than we would with us, maybe.
It depends, some distilleries at the federal level will pay tax when they cork, most do not. Smaller ones typically do because it's easier for bookkeeping. Most actually pay tax when the stuff goes out the door and keep the stuff pre-tax. Again, as long as it's a federal COLA. But for example, we've had issues where you've got inventory on the shop floor that's going to say Mexico, and it's labeled for the U.S. market, and you put a Mexican label on it.
We don't pay sales tax, excise tax for that anyway, though.
But that's what I'm saying, it's pre-tax, it's still manufacturing until it tax is paid, which means you can further manipulate it if you have to. We don't like to, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen because of business circumstance sometimes. I just don't want some of our members to have to be, to find themselves having to remanufacture something that's already finished good under the law, and that create a problem.
Maybe we back.
And maybe I'm overthinking this a little bit.
Well,
No, but-
I think that's a really good point, Steve, and maybe we back this up so that it's not a definition of where the manufacturing process ends. It's a definition of first sold in Colorado.
Or where it enters commerce.
Where it enters commerce, either one.
Because that may be more suitable than where manufacturing ends. It's where it enters the commerce of the state of Colorado.
As a consumer-ready product.
Yeah. And that, I think, again, would go back to tax. It's just like where an imported good enters the commerce of the United States under U.S. customs law, it's when it clears customs and duties and taxes are paid. And then it is legally in commerce in the U.S.
Now, on the tax side, as far as when taxes are paid, that's gonna need to have the tax division's input, cause that's,
Well, but I mean, we already know when we pay our taxes. I mean,
Yeah.
what we're worried about here, I believe, is when this becomes a wholesaleable good, correct? I mean, that's.
I guess
that's
the definition
point
of when is it
conversation.
manufactured? At what point?
What's the ultimate goal of defining this? Isn't it when it enters commerce and is available to a wholesaler? And if so, are we looking at the right thing with a manufacturing definition? Because I think we're really looking at when it legally enters the commerce of the state of Colorado, right?
I think, and talking to Joni, I think we may be opening a whole big can of worms we don't intend to open.
Yeah, and just so you all know, I mean, this is something like this, I'm gonna have to send way up the chain to make sure
Yeah.
that there's not unintended consequences, so I can't
Sure.
commit to anything on this today.
And
Right, but we're looking at maybe possible rulemaking on this, I mean,
Well, either way, I mean, I think that, I just need to make sure there's not any unintended consequences and things like that, so
Agreed.
just, whether it's rulemaking or a statutory change, it doesn't matter, it would still have the same,
Implications for.
Right.
Well,
so that doesn't necessarily make me feel any better either way until I have some clearance as to specifically what we were looking at and then get it cleared.
Well, and I'm gonna go back to why. What is the ultimate
What are we
intent of defining what we're trying to define? And do we really need to define the end of the manufacturing process? Or do we need to define when it enters commerce in the state of Colorado?
Or if it was a tax collection issue, isn't it simple as a statement saying that taxes can be collected?
Yeah, I mean, we need to figure out what we're.
well, I think statutorily is pretty well defined when taxes are paid, first
Correct.
sold, that's done and over with. We're talking about when is it considered manufactured? That's this whole conversation, my understanding is.
But I mean, what's the
what-
point?
Well, Patrick, I would disagree.
What's the point is so that we allow different things to happen with unmanufactured product than manufactured product. We allow unmanufactured product to be sold between two distilleries.
True.
It's because it's not a finished product or a consumer-ready product, therefore you can do that. You can't sell manufactured product. I think we can get there both different ways, but I think it's probably, I don't want to take up a whole lot of time with the subgroup. I mean it's a conversation I'm open to that we can do during rulemaking. How about that? I mean,
Doug?
Patrick, I'd go back to say your first premise may be incorrect. Yes, the statute talks about when taxes are collected, but I think there has been in the past, different applications of the statute. That was
okay.
what I was trying to
Okay,
say.
I understand. Okay.
And so I think regulation is perfectly fine, and I think, I think Mickey's right, that we need to, take a look at when the taxes are paid, and if that definition is when it enters commerce, I think that's a good.
Okay, I'm open to it.
Maybe it's as simple as when it's packaged for retail sale and appropriate taxes are paid, or wholesale sale and appropriate taxes are paid.
Okay. Let's
Just
move on.
my 2 cents on that.
Let's go ahead and move on to the next item or topic for further discussion, which is when does the retail sale take place? And that was raised at the last meeting. And I'm trying to remember what the context was of that, but someone raised that issue. I was trying to look at the minutes and the notes, and it doesn't really help.
The context I remember was, especially pertaining to online. So a consumer goes to a liquor store's website, or if, direct-to-consumer sales, it goes to a winery's website. When and where does that online transaction take place? That's one.
Okay. So was it for the, I guess the discussion point on that, is it to determine whether the proper sales tax is collected, or, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what the issue with that is.
From a winery's perspective, I think the question is, and this is a model Gene has brought up before, which I know raises a lot of red flags. A wine representative goes to somebody's home, does a Tupperware party, wine tasting, and the consumers get on their own laptops or cell phones and make purchases. Legal, not legal.
Okay.
And is that sale then taking place at the winery or indeed the liquor store? If it's placed on a computer?
For legitimate online transactions, it's sort of dual. The sale occurs when you order, also the sale, there's also an aspect of delivery too. There's a dual aspect of that quote sale. I mean, the money may exchange like an online transaction. I would consider the financial sale at the liquor store or the winery, but it's not complete until it's delivered. And it's still subject to regulation until that point, of course.
Any other comments on that?
We're also looking into, Doug, as far as like some of these home situations where there are circumstances, legitimate circumstances where people do go to people's homes and even though they can't quote solicit necessarily. Was that part of the?
Well, I think it's connected.
Okay.
That, if you say you can't sell wine in people's homes, whether you're a retailer or a winery, but the sale is happening on a computer and therefore the transaction is taking place at the licensed premises, is that illegal?
Right, and there's also an aspect of the sale that in this situation at the house, because the solicitation in itself is part of the sale. So it's a little bit, there's a lot of fingers in this one.
Other comments on that one?
I have a question. I couldn't hear Patrick what you said. Did you say something about delivery and where that's where the tax is, sales sort of happen?
I mean, when you have an internet sale and delivery, the sale is from the beginning to the end. One different aspects of the sale, the finances may have already occurred, exchange hands, but until it's delivered, that sale really isn't necessarily complete and still, of course, open to regulation.
Let's move on to the next one, which is erosion of the three-tier system. I'm trying to look at my notes from last time.
Patrick say that was expressed in the
Yeah,
NCSLA.
something we expressed, in the last regional meeting in October, and it's been a discussion with NCSLA. NCSLA is a national conference of state liquor administrators, made up of regulators and industry members throughout the country. And the challenge to different state laws concerning the three-tier system, manufacturer, wholesaler, and retailer. Just to remind you, there's a lawsuit in Texas right now going on against the Texas ABC concerning single, share prohibitions. So you have a company who has a retail interest and they have a single share in a manufacturer or even one or more shares. Texas says you're prohibited, and Colorado would as well. They're challenging that, so that's one, I'd say, a challenge to the three-tier system.
Yeah, the Supreme Court just denied cert in the Texas case, not on the one share case, but on the residency. So there's a lot of three-tier stuff going on right now in the courts, and lots of challenges. So far, they have mostly been upheld, and with the NCSLA charge too, that's looks like where it is. So.
Further discussion on that? Let's move on to the next one then. Internet sales. We've kind of talked a little bit about that, but is there something specifically that we want to try to address through the Senate Bill 197 report?
This question I have is, what is the current department's position on non-Colorado retail stores shipping alcohol to Colorado consumers directly from out of state? Legal or illegal?
Not legal.
And what sort of enforcement, if any, is there?
When we run across those, Bruce, we don't go out actively looking for them, or we need about 5 more investigators. And so when we get complaints, we do look into them, and what we do is we contact that out-of-state liquor store or retailer or entity that's shipping, and we tell them stop and desist, stop, cease and desist. If they refuse to do that, we then contact their state ABC or liquor enforcement and get them involved. And of course, some may or may not be hesitant to do that due to the Empire case in New York that's still pending, but that's what we usually do. And I would say in the last 3 years, we've probably done a handful, maybe 10 investigations in that where we've had those places stopped. Are there a lot out there? Yeah. We just don't have the manpower to go out, to actively seek them all out, but it's not legal. We're not going to, if we get a complaint, I'm not soliciting for those right now, but if we get a complaint, we will look into it. Mickey.
And Bruce, that's why we actually put this common carrier issue on here as a bullet point. We'd like to at some point have the work group look at something similar to what Illinois did as far as common carrier reporting and enhanced fines and penalties dealing with the illegal shipment of alcohol across state lines. And we're not talking about the one case going in, but
Would you want to be part of this working group, something for this working group to look at?
Sure. I mean, I think I sent you some language.
You did, I haven't had a chance to look at it, I appreciate that, yeah.
So we could circulate it to subgroups.
That'd be great. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
just had a question for Mickey. Doesn't Illinois have a private right of action on enforcement as well?
I don't know the answer to that.
I believe they do.
I think that was overturned.
No, it's a key Tom rule, and it's not really a whole different aspect to go to, but there is an aspect there that allows for private right of action.
I have a client going through that in Illinois right now.
And in terms of the problem of inadequate resources for investigation and enforcement, the concept of creating the private attorneys general is done in a lot of different contexts, and if it's not an option, and maybe it is, to increase funding for the department, the private right of action might be a way to look at that. And again, this would be as against out-of-state entities violating our law, shipping directly into our state.
I know, I will tell you, the language we sent did not contemplate any private right of action. We were looking at more of a reporting of manifests being required to be submitted to the department and maybe enhance fines and penalties, but we hadn't thought about getting into any of the private right of action.
That makes me nervous.
Well, that was,
That was-
also abused by at least one attorney in Illinois.
Yes.
Who has been
Yeah.
cited and, his case is overturned.
That's not
So-
true, Don, that's not true.
It's an abuse, well, that's true.
That part I agree.
I'm sorry, Jim, what's not true?
I don't think it's been overturned.
And the costs have been incurred in any case, so.
Yeah, I mean,
Many
guys,
wineries were
this is a
reimbursed
huge
for what they
discussion.
paid under that, so the legal status is pending, but I think that can lead to abuses, could be agreed on that.
Oh, actually, I think anything can lead to abuses, I think.
Okay.
That's why we're all sitting here today, because we don't believe in any abuses.
But I think that should be a work, maybe the next work group discussion to bring back to the whole group, because if we had anticipated, like I said, we wouldn't really be contemplating doing anything until the 2018 session, so we'd have a year to come up with something that worked for everybody.
So Mickey, you'll share that
Yes.
draft legislation with everybody, and I think for the purposes of this meeting, we'll move on to the next concept, which is out-of-state delivery. Out-of-state delivery.
Ron, I think there's a question back here.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
okay. The next concept was out-of-state delivery that was raised at the last meeting. Not sure what context it was in.
Doesn't that kind of all fit in?
It does. I think,
Internet sales, out-of-state delivery, and common carrier.
yeah.
Kind of all.
Should we kind of table that one and talk about that with that draft legislation next meeting?
Hey Mickey, is anything changed since that draft you gave to me, cause I can just use that as a draft to get to the subgroup?
I think it's fine.
Okay, cool.
And then the next topic was attempts to attack retail and wholesale. I'm not quite sure what.
Are these in the notes, Ron, from last week?
Well, I'm looking at it and I'm trying to. I'm just trying to look through. I'm not sure.
That just sounds like a regular legislative session to me.
Yeah. Let me see if I can go back on the notes for next meeting on that one. See if I can, actually might even listen to the recording. The next item was allowing shipment to other states.
What would we need other than we already have a direct ship permit? I mean, we're not really, I mean, at least from my client's perspective, we're not interested in expanding.
I think it can came up as a question, and I believe you answered it. I don't know that there's an open issue, but if I heard correctly, if I remember correctly, LED's position is that for a Colorado retailer to ship out of state, as long as we're not violating the laws of the recipient state, there's no Colorado prohibition on doing so.
Correct.
Yep.
That was my question.
Okay.
And just to be clear, we're not opening up for manufacturers to ship.
Nope.
We love that, by the way.
I mean, you can ship to, you can ship, I mean, you can ship as a manufacturer exporting, you can do that.
To a wholesaler.
To a wholesaler, but not,
Not to a retailer.
not to a personal consumer, no.
I know, I figured I'd just.
We're okay with it. Shipping to a wholesaler's fine.
I would like to add, not discussion in here, but with that work group, the direct ship permit does allow, I'm gonna pick on, it does allow out-of-state wineries to have agents in Colorado doing solicitation.
The shipping permit does not, no.
Which one does that?
Importer.
The import. I thought it was the.
Importer still has to use wholesaler.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, if you have a direct shipping permit in Colorado, that does not give you the permission to come into Colorado and sell your product.
Well, how do they do it then, these wine at home parties? How do they do that? No, they don't, they're legal.
Some are, not all of them.
Okay, how are they legal? And I don't wanna do away with it. I would like to have a discussion of how Colorado companies could participate as well in that type of solicitation and sales.
It can be done, but it's very, there's specific details, maybe we can talk offline as far as how those can be done legally, yeah. The ones we've seen.
'Cause I think we are getting a significant amount of uptick in the number of sales activities by those entities in
Okay.
Colorado. And it does put Colorado retailers at a distinct disadvantage.
So I think the common carrier issues will build into that other discussion. Online purchases from a non-licensed out-of-state retailer. Online purchases from a non.
Part of the same discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which leads us to the final one, which is allowing suppliers to directly supply to consumers.
And was that your comment as far as?
So that was a question, I already knew the answer, we talked about it. And we're allowed to sell to consumers direct under our current licenses, under certain circumstances. I don't think that's what he's talking about, I think he's talking about something else. We're not reopening our ability to run sales rooms, are we?
I'm aware.
Any other discussion on that? And again, I'll go back and listen through some of this and flush it out a little bit more for our next meeting.
I actually would like to discuss, and I don't know if this is the right venue, parity among the number of tasting rooms that an alcohol beverage manufacturer is allowed to operate between the different categories.
Steve, I would propose that if, in that discussion, we also discuss a farm distillery and a farm brewery license to achieve those, because that's originally how the wineries got 5 remote sales.
Understood. We have some local jurisdiction problems with farm distilleries here in Colorado, in that the state considers distilling an agricultural activity, as does the federal government. But there are a number of local jurisdictions that Jeffco being one of them, that do not consider distilling anything other than industrial. And that's an issue. If you're gonna create a farm distillery license, then you're excluding local jurisdictions that prohibit distilling on agricultural zone land, which is probably 30 to 40% of the state.
Last time I investigated that kind of discussion, I was told, shut up, because it's state doesn't interfere with local.
And,
zoning.
I mean, I literally, I just had this exact discussion with Jeff Cook,
Well,
County
it's
Commissioner
not
last
just
week.
Jeffco, but.
So, it's not just Jeffco, I know,
But I think this is a discussion that, you know, we'd be willing to facilitate, and take a look at the New York model.
I think the New York model is a good model, I think there's other states we should take a look at as well. But there's some problems with the New York model in that it doesn't line up with current statute in Colorado. It's an example, but we don't wanna totally rip apart our laws again. I think it's far easier to look at something that's fair parity across multiple classes of alcohol beverages. My 2 cents. But I don't know if this is the right venue, but I do think it's a discussion we need to have.
Okay. So can we table that to the next meeting, cause
Absolutely.
we're just,
Absolutely.
would you come prepared to maybe help facilitate that conversation at the next meeting? Maybe?
I'm worried I'm supposed to be in Italy at a sales
Okay.
meeting.
All right.
Next meeting.
And then Doug, on
But
the,
yes,
on the farm distilleries license, can you come prepared at the next meeting to kinda give us a overview of that?
Actually, I think I will also miss January, but,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. So I'll put together a summary, but I think that the manufacturing process, I think there's something to look at there. The common carrier issues, and then, the internet related stuff. So I'll try to pare those down into some smaller topics that we can go forward with at the next meeting. Anything else for this group? Thanks.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll meet back at 11. And we'll end up with the tastings and growlers discussion, which I know will probably be pretty short, right?
Yes, I think.
Okay, we're gonna get fired back up again here. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to get an opportunity to meet yet, my name is Louis Koski, and I'm the Deputy Senior Director of Enforcement for the Department of Revenue. We're transitioning into the growlers and tasters subgroup. Here we've got a few things that I wanted to go over, just kind of recap on last week. The way I see it, we still have one outstanding issue on the table with respect to tastings, and I want to kind of start there. But before I do, I want to go through some of the things that it seemed like that we had some general agreement on, if not a consensus on, in this particular area of the 197 work group. So, for example, and this is all in the meeting minutes, is that if for this particular issue, we're going to allow for this to happen on Sundays. Anybody? So, if you guys have any questions about this, go ahead and stop me. We're talking about increasing to 156 days a year, but still allowing for local jurisdictions to be able to restrict that further if they wanted to. And then the hours of the tastings, end times and total amount of hours each days, not earlier than 11 or after 7 is kind of where we landed on that. Is that?
Yeah, I thought we were gonna expand that a little bit.
Were we gonna expand that a little bit? Going off of the meeting minutes. Does anybody remember what we're gonna expand that to? Any hours or?
I think any hours.
Just leave it up to, and then give locals the ability to.
Good.
For my part, I wouldn't suggest having tastings late at night. I mean,
No.
we could be up until, basically till midnight. I don't think that'd be a great idea.
Kevin?
What I wrote down, I don't know if this was the last discussion, was leave the 11 a.m. as the start point, but change the 7 p.m. to 9 p.m.
That's fine.
11 to 9. Anybody have any issues with that? Seeing no issues, so then.
And related to that, I think we also talked about the number of hours and duration, being 8, and they need not, and the language statutory says need not be consecutive. I don't know, did we?
Yeah, I think we agreed that they didn't have to be consecutive.
Well, that's in statute now, so.
Right.
Did we change the total number?
Yes.
Okay, you're right. Okay.
So we're saying 8 hours on any particular day, so there wouldn't be an additional recommendation on that then, right? 8 hours. Is it 5 hours now? So we'd be going up to 8, and then it wouldn't necessarily have to be consecutive, which is consistent with what the law says now. Gotcha. Okay. And then I think we agreed that retail or retailer employee would be the one who could do the pouring, and then who's going to be, and then we talked a little bit about the wholesaler and how that would be culpable if we allowed for the wholesaler to actually do it. I think we kind of all agreed that it would still be on the retail licensee at the time. Is that what everybody else remembers? So you were getting ready to jump in here because I think I misspoke. We were talking about allowing the wholesalers to be able to pour.
But it was the suppliers, it wasn't just the wholesale.
Okay.
Yeah, we like the suppliers.
And even,
Right, okay.
as long as they were responsible vendor trained. Do we want that?
I don't think the retailer
Okay.
said that.
No, not us, right.
No, I thought we thought the suppliers and wholesalers could also be,
Right.
involved in the tasting. And the pouring and
Right.
Under the supervision of the retailer, and the retailer's ultimately responsible for what
Right.
happens. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm just gonna put out there, if a wholesaler employee serves to a minor, the wholesale license will receive administrative action. Okay, just wanna let you know that from our point of view. And,
I think
and
we
this,
put-
and the retailer,
So both would.
yeah.
I think if people are pouring,
And
they
the
should be
supplier.
tips trained or something equivalent.
And the supplier.
Yeah.
What's that?
And the
Whoever's pouring.
responsible, right?
Well,
Yeah.
the retail liquor store employee is required to be responsible vendor trained, aren't they, if they're.
Well, now they are.
Yeah.
Now they are.
What I'm saying is a wholesaler or manufacturer employee, if they are pouring, they should be trained.
We talked about that last time.
So last time we landed on this, I wanted to think we said that was not the case. That we weren't gonna require the training for the wholesaler or the supplier, and that the retail store was gonna have somebody who was trained in that area, but then they would be the one that was responsible. Having said that, when Patrick mentions the notion that wholesalers are still, there's potential for the wholesaler to be subject to administrative action if someone serves to a minor. Do we want to reopen that conversation and talk a little bit more about it?
If they're subject to action, they should be trained.
Stephen, Kevin?
Well, I was gonna say something not related to the training, but, the language I'd written down, rather than try and list everyone out, is to say a designated agent of the licensee. I don't know if that works. But one thing that occurred to me after we had that discussion is, if it's not, an employee, or the owner or the manager of the liquor store, and it's someone else, should there at least be someone employed by the licensee present? That
By
might
the
be-
wholesaler or supplier licensee or the store?
If there's any other person other than someone employed or the owner of the retail liquor store conducting or doing the pouring, that there ought to be someone employed by or owner of the retail liquor store, at least present while the tasting is being conducted.
I think we talked about that last time.
That would get around having to put tips training for the.
That's a good point, yeah.
Does that, that may be one, basically two saying there, somebody, an agent of a brewer or a brewer himself, pouring beer or wine or whatever it may be, and then standing next to it.
I'm asking the question, does that help?
I think if you're tasting in a retail establishment, there's gonna be retail employees there that work for that establishment at all times anyway, they're not gonna leave the establishment. But I think anybody that's pouring, especially the way the laws are written, especially if the wholesaler, whoever it is that's doing the tasting, is gonna be held responsible for a violation of law, then they need to be tips trained or equivalent.
Okay, hold that thought, Stephen.
Yeah, I think, although in general, it's certainly always a good idea to err on the side of safety and training. The circumstance, at least for larger stores that we're dealing with, is, during a tasting, we'll have 3 or 4 of our employees involved, and maybe a winemaker who's flown in from out of state for the event, and we're tasting that winemaker's wines, and he or she's talking about it, and if our employee is busy carding a customer doing something else, it's currently illegal for that winemaker to pick up her bottle and pour the 1 ounce pour, even though we've got a measure there that tells them how much to pour. We're supervising the whole situation. The people have already been carded. They're holding a card that says that they've been carded and how many pours they've had. So it's that circumstance that I'm saying that rule is a little ridiculous in that application. And so without creating a rule that creates a lot of problems in others, I'd like to have a situation where we don't have a violation over something that's so common sense as that. So if it's under the supervision of the retailer and we are responsible and our people are tips trained there and are making sure that it's all being done in compliance with law, it would be hard for us to verify the equivalent training of somebody from out of state, and frankly, they might not have been trained, but I don't think that would necessarily mean it would be unsafe or inappropriate.
And that's fine, but if that is indeed the case, then the licensee whose premise it is on bears the risk of an overservice or a underage service, etc., not the wholesaler or manufacturer pouring.
Both.
But Patrick,
But if it's both, then they need to be trained. If it's not both, if it's the licensee.
Train or not, Steve, they're both liable.
So Stephen, let me throw this out to you. Could you on the wholesaler side achieve that as just a good business practice? I mean, do you want to? Does it have to be a requirement, or can it be if a wholesaler or a supplier is going to participate in this kind of activity?
I'm worried that a small manufacturer is going to say, we don't need to be trained to do this. We don't have to have somebody who's hard to do it. Somebody's going to walk in, make a mistake, having not been through the training, and not be, basically they're going to get the book thrown at them as opposed to, and accidents happen. If they don't have that tips card in their pocket, they're not going to get the benefit of the responsible vendor program, and somebody's going to get hurt when if we just make it a requirement. I mean, every one of my folks, hell, I've got a tips card in my back pocket right now. So that God forbid something, somebody does something stupid, we're not going to get slammed. But the training's important, and not every small manufacturer is going to step up to that.
Steve, I just have a question, but I mean, couldn't the businesses make their own policy as to how they're gonna have their people, when they go out to a retailer, decide whether they want their people tips trained, since they are ultimately gonna be responsible, versus some who may not want to do that? I'm just throwing that out, I mean, because if you don't want it, then,
Well,
you make sure your people are tips trained, but if somebody else feels comfortable and doesn't wanna do it, they're taking the risk.
Again, I think I would feel a lot more comfortable if the licensed premises the tasting is going on at bears the risk. And then they can say, people need to come in with tips or not, but it's the licensed location where the service is being conducted, not the wholesaler or the manufacturer that bears the risk, because it's being done on someone else's licensed premises.
I guess my reaction, Louis, is that tips training is a choice for anyone now, and this would be the only instance statute where it'd be mandated.
It already is.
I'm sorry?
Isn't it already mandated?
Yeah, it's already mandated.
For retail establishments?
It's already mandated for.
Just
And that
For-
is the only.
Liquor licensed drugstores have to be a responsible vendor after January, and then service within a common consumption area in the entertainment district is the other place where mandated seller service training, as well as current law of tastings.
Patrick, I wanted to ask you for clarification on your statement. Hypothetical scenario, the supplier is standing there as they do now, talking about the product, not pouring. And the retail employees overserves or serves an underage person. Are you saying you would cite the wholesaler for their participation?
No.
So would the citation then go to the server and not the licensee?
Well, what's criminal to the server?
But I'm taking, in this situation, the supplier would not be held liable for the actions of the retailer.
Right, 'cause they didn't do it.
Right, but you're saying if the wholesaler overserves somebody, if the wholesaler representative overserves somebody, the wholesaler's license would be cited, not just the representative.
Correct?
And that's triggered if you have a wholesaler or supplier who's doing the pouring. Right?
Right. If you
Yep.
change the rule to allow.
Right.
What?
If you
Kevin.
change the rule
Where
to
in
allow
the-
Yeah.
a
I feel
supplier.
like I should
Change the
know
law.
this if it's the case, where in the tasting statute is seller server training required?
It's there now. This is the person that is serving the alcohol must be seller server trained.
In the tasting statute?
Yeah.
Tasting shall be conducted only by a person who has completed a server training program that meets the standards established, blah, 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 and that is in 30110C.
See Roman one?
Yeah.
There it is.
C Roman
I
one.
see it, thank you.
So can I throw out a potential scenario here then? So for tastings, at a minimum, the retail store has to have an employee on site that's tips trained, that's supervising the tasting, and then a business decision if a wholesaler is doing the pouring, whether or not they're going to have tips training. And I recognizing, Steve, that you don't agree with that. You're more of a make it mandate the training.
That goes for the wholesaler and supplier pouring, whoever is pouring.
Correct. Gets tips. That's what you're saying.
Well, that's my question.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I realize there is an out-of-state issue with out-of-state visitors. I don't think it's as big an issue as perhaps it might sound. But if in pretty much every other scenario, a supplier or manufacturer, we have to be tip certified. So why wouldn't we need to be tip certified to pour in a liquor store? We're taking the same risk. Might as well have the same requirement for training, which also mitigates some of that risk.
Stephen, in which other scenarios is it mandated that suppliers are?
The tasting room statute that we just talked about. So if I'm pouring in my own tasting room, I have to be.
No, you
It's
don't.
not in the tasting room, it's just
No.
in
No, you
the
don't.
liquor stores.
I thought it was in the tasting room as well.
No.
No, but you would be, I believe Patrick has said, you would qualify then for responsible vendor
Right.
status if you've trained your staff.
Right. I mean, if you train your staff and you've fulfilled the requirements of being a responsible vendor, then you get the benefits of that potentially.
Okay.
But there's no mandate selling.
I thought that they're, all right, my bad. Never mind.
So does that change your thinking though?
I think everybody should be certified, to be quite honest.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I think everybody should be trained. I just think it's the prudent, smart thing to do, and I think the more we can push people to do it, the better.
Okay. Yes.
I think Patrick said that liquor licensed drugstores would have to.
And I'm corrected. July 1st was the mandate. So as of July 1st, liquor licensed drugstores have to be considered responsible vendors, or they could be sanctioned just for that alone.
But if they already currently have to be, if they do tastings,
Yes.
they have to be tip certified or responsible vendor now.
Yes.
Yes.
And to
Yeah.
piggyback on that, if you, just this whole discussion of training, if you plug in designated agent of a licensee into that, thanks, Gene, the language starts off by saying they have to be, seller server trained, so.
But I'm not all that hip on making a supplier a designated agent of the licensee.
Well, whatever you wanna call it, but all I'm trying to say is if it's gonna be, if you're gonna add in other people in there, the beginning of that paragraph says that they have to be seller server trained, so in order to, that not to be the case, you have to create an exception.
Well, yes, but that's baked down at the premises, which I think is the overall, the premises is gonna be trained. Everyone pretty much working there, other than maybe somebody from a wholesaler or retail supplier coming in to help pour the wine, but it's under the supervision of the retailer, which has the training.
I know, I'm
Let's-
just looking at
yeah.
how it would fit into the existing statute.
Or I mean, there's a little bit there's a little bit misnomer here. Under the tasting law, under 30110(3), the person conducting the service has to be seller server trained. That doesn't mean that licensed entity may be a responsible vendor. totally two different animals, because it just, an individual mandate, it's not a mandate for the liquor store or liquor licensed drugstore to follow, responsible vendor status.
Yes.
Does anyone have any material concerns about a supplier coming in and doing a tasting, or a supplier's representative, if that supplier's representative does have some sort of training? I would not, but I think the supervision piece is, and someone who's responsible for the license, that needs to be, present.
Go ahead. I mean, when you think about what TIPS training is, I mean, the vast majority of the training is how to properly ID. And so, in my vision of how this is working, as the retailer supervising this and our employee conducting the tasting, we're gonna do that. We're not gonna rely on a supplier to do that.
Well,
And we're gonna be supervising the pouring as well. It's just gonna be while they're sitting there talking to the customers who are tasting, not having this inadvertent violation because of a rule that is not very common sense. That's the only thing that I'm trying to accomplish. And I think if we were required to verify the TIPS training of anybody else coming to our tastings, I'd probably just prohibit it. I'd continue to prohibit it, because the risk that we would miss that would be too high. We've got too many people coming in and out, and it's one thing to keep track of our own employees, which we do meticulously, but if we're trying to make this functional and workable, I think the rule just needs to be, we're taking the risk, and we will supervise and we will make sure it's done correctly. And if a retailer were so foolish as to leave a supplier alone at their tasting area, then they should bear the consequences of that bad decision.
To add to that point, say somebody is coming in from out of state and they're saying, okay, I need to know Colorado laws, so they go online and do tips online, and then say they do violate, we're gonna turn around and say, we don't allow online training, so even though you were aware of what the rules were, we don't consider you a qualified, or having taken a state authorized responsible vendor training program. So even there, that might cause a problem.
And would the division recognize other states certified
No,
programs?
because
No.
we have different laws.
Yeah,
I mean, other states, as far as, you have to be on the list of the approved trainers on our list. Some are out of state, but, like TIPS is one.
Right.
But it has to be a classroom training and it has to pertain to Colorado laws. But I mean, if they just pop on, a lot of people think they can pop online specifically to TIPS and say, well, I did the Colorado training. And it's like, well, we don't recognize online training from TIPS from Colorado as a responsible vendor. So
Yeah,
they might think they're qualifying, but they're not.
So that just seems to me like it adds another complexity to the requirement component of it. Is it prudent? Probably. Is it a requirement that kind of puts it into a different level that may be a little bit more difficult to be able to actually enforce? So how about I do this? So for the next meeting, I try and put some of this stuff into some hard and fast language that we can all look at and kind of play around, and then we can have a little bit more substantive conversation on that if we need to, unless we have some general agreement on it. Does that work?
Can we take another look at Colorado recognizing online training as long as it's a Colorado specific program?
Well, how do you prove? That's the whole thing. How do you prove that it was Megan that took that online training course? It could be anybody saying it was Megan.
But
That's
it's
the
the
whole.
same as an online university or any other online certification class.
Or put it this way, Steve, at this point, just strict online we don't allow, and I'm not, we'll open that door. What we did open to was live streaming. So like if in a classroom like this, and there's actually live interaction,
And I remember that, yeah.
we allow that. But pure online training right now, I'm not ready to open that door because it has about the effectiveness of,
Well, there are other states that do it.
well, I know, I'm not willing to do that.
Nevada being one.
And that's the rulemaking. I have no issue with, we can address that next rulemaking session, but at this point, I'm not wanting to open that door.
Yeah, I'd like to keep, thanks. So I want to keep kind of moving down my list here too. So I'll work on some language with our staff here at LED before the next meeting. And then we just to kind of get a couple other things that I think we had some general agreement on, kind of back to the hour or the days per year and the hours per day and stuff like that. There was no, we didn't put a limit on how many days per week you could do a tasting. You just have 156 if it ends up being several days in a row. That's fine as long as you're within that time frame. Then this kind of gets us to the one point now I think that we do need some more discussion about, and I think we had some really good discussion on it last time, but it's along the lines of who pays for the product. So we're at a tasting, we're at a retail liquor store. Who pays for it? Right now the law is currently that the retail store pays for it, correct? They buy it from the wholesaler or the supplier. I think there was some interest last time we talked about changing that, and so I'd like to have a little conversation about where folks lie on that. Was that totally wrong about that? Go ahead.
Well, I sent an email to Patrick saying that licenses would like to have the ability to pay for the wine sample, but I think we may have some issue with that. I don't know how you guys feel about us buying it at retail.
Kinda like the hand sales thing, you buy it.
So there's an interest in that. Was there anybody else who had some thoughts on that, or are we still?
I think we distillers, we like to be able to provide spirits for tasting. It's a marketing cost to us, as opposed to having to sell it to the retailer and essentially buy it back.
Okay. Patrick, I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on this because you
Yeah,
talk a little bit more about.
This is opening another issue that I am not in favor in the law to allow suppliers or wholesalers to pay for this product. It took us 2 years to get a quasi hand sale rule out there where the suppliers are purchasing items to give away in a off-premise location. And the thought here is we're just allowing it for beer. It's like for a year to see how well it goes, if there's any kind of abuse. Allowing this by law for the suppliers to pay for this is a huge door. There's potential for abuse just happens right away. And I'd rather go slowly than go quickly to allow suppliers to pay for the product for tastings. And the reason it's in the law is there's a reason for that. It's a trade practice issue. And I'm for one not all that in favor of opening that door quite yet. Maybe give the ability for the rulemaking process maybe to allow that, but statutorily I'm not in favor of allowing that to change.
So given what Patrick had to say on that, and I'm looking at the list of things, there's a pretty good list of things we're looking at that makes this process more permissive. Can we kind of start with some of the things that we've talked about in terms of the Sundays and the days per year and all those kinds of things, and then maybe for the time being table the concept and leave it as is in statute for the retailers to purchase it and not have a recommendation on that? Is anybody totally opposed to that? I get where you guys are coming from. Yes?
Can we kind of punt that back to the working group rather than the SB 197 group on that particular component? So I see what Patrick's saying, and I think we have to have more discussion among our membership as to whether that's a good idea or not a good idea.
That's fine.
Not that we don't love you, but.
Yeah, well, and I like the idea of maybe making it not in statute necessarily, but giving you the ability to.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I think it's a good thing that we can vet through the rulemaking process. And because division's willing to slowly open that door to allow some of the 3-tier, practices, even out a little bit, but slowly.
So, Patrick, would you say you think we can do some of that through rulemaking process?
You would have to change the law to be able to do that, yeah.
That's what I thought too,
So then, Patrick, would a potential recommendation be to change the statute to allow for SLA rulemaking authority in this area?
Correct.
I think I really would like to, before we jump on any of these great ideas, because I think just giving them the authority to do rulemaking without more statutory, me having more direction on statutorily what we want, I don't feel comfortable with. That's a very broad shift of power. And so
So since we're in the holiday times and things never happen as fast as we want them to during the holidays, can you get that conversation started based on some of the framework we're already, which is somewhat lined out here in the notes, and I think we'll probably be the same way. Then we'll.
I have started.
Okay, great. So then I think real quick then we talked about last time, and since we're, I mean, assuming that we're kind of heading down the direction of retailers purchasing it and recognizing there's gonna be some more conversation about it, we talked about discards, so whatever's left at the end of the tasting. There was an interest in maybe being able to secure that on the premises. The retailer secures it, and so I think we kind of left it at that you're allowed to keep it for a reasonable period of time. I don't remember what the time frame was that you'd be able to hang on to that, and it had to be locked, closed locked space, Kevin. So if you could work on a definition on that for us, that'd be great.
So is there a reason we should have a time frame on it?
I don't know.
Well, you might want
Other than
one.
your wife.
Yeah, I think
Probably
that's all.
doesn't.
And here, right?
Would you wanna,
Lock it up for a year, it'd be 14
Have to scratch off the label and
No, scratch off the label, let's do that.
just sticker over it.
Yeah, give it back to Steve and he'll.
So I think, I mean, Patrick, I don't know if you have a feeling about this. I mean, I think the big thing that we talked about last time from LED's perspective is it absolutely has to be locked up. So you're gonna be talking about potentially having product there that's open and on, and we talked about it being locked up. Did you have any preference on timeframes?
you know, timeframes I'm not as concerned about, but that locked up is. Or it has to be, while there can be no consumption outside the tasting by anybody, by the liquor store owner, the liquor license store owner, no, it's just, it can't be used for parties, it can't, it has been plenty in the past, so that was our concern initially, I think, was just, turning into a bar, after, so, being locked up outside the tasting times, I think we'd be okay with that.
Kevin?
I think it's just language tacked onto the end of the existing language and statute that says, after it talks about destroying samples or retain such samples in an enclosed and locked space if the samples will be used in a subsequent tasting.
Okay.
Is it if or for subsequent?
The samples will be used in a subsequent tasting.
So I think we wanna work with that a little bit, cause it's part of the conversation last time was whether, if a retailer purchased the product, which is kind of the direction we're starting with today, if it leaves the premises for any reason, it can't come back, right? So it has to, so if it's open and it's gonna be used like the next day in a tasting, it would have to stay there on the premise and be, locked up. You good on that? Alright. Does anybody have anything else they wanna talk about with respect to tastings?
There's one that Gene brought up last time that you didn't mention. I don't think this was, I think everyone was fine with this, but where the statute now says licensees shall prohibit patrons from leaving the licensed premises with an unconsumed sample, just changing prohibit to not knowingly allow.
So who would
But-
be
but-
ticketed?
Kevin, do we have that language much anywhere else in statute, the one knowingly allow?
What's that?
In other statutes, when it comes to like the on-premises locations, we can maybe mirror some of that language?
Whatever, I mean,
Yeah.
I think we use the word permit.
Yeah.
Well, not permit, cause that's active or constructive knowledge.
Yeah, right.
Cause does that change the strict liability if you put
Correct.
knowingly?
Right.
Yeah, well, yeah, so permit would be, it's either you knew it happened or you reasonably should have known it happened, right?
And what about, with that though, comes a signage requirement though, too?
Like for the gaming?
No, for the regaming, and then also to have that affirmative defense on the on-premises side, you have to have signage.
The signage came up, it was either a sign or someone stationed at the door.
Right.
But I don't know if that's a level of detail that, I mean, it's a 1 ounce cup, man.
It is different. They are mandated to do that. Give me tavern licenses, but that's only on premises mandated too. But I think permit. I think that as long as language is some of the same, I'm okay. But knowingly, I mean, I'm open to that language.
Anything else on tastings?
Where's my sample?
I think I have a little bit
Thank
left
you
in
so
here.
much.
It's pretty.
That's more than an ounce.
That's an ounce.
I can throw in an apple too if you want.
Thank
I don't know how you guys get through this without snacks. I think I'm the only one that.
You've been stumped.
I have for this particular portion, Jim. All right, so I'm going to we're going to move on to growlers right now, and so I wanted to just real quick go to the statutory language on growlers, and the reason why I think that's important was last time we had conversation and I know it was some real spirited conversation about this getting expanded and those kinds of things. So I want to really stick to the language of the law because where we had this conversation about competition, we had a recommendation that was on the table just to pull it. The statutory language doesn't really give that option to us. It says we shall make some recommendations with respect to retail liquor stores being allowed to sell growlers. So that's the statutory language. So when we have this conversation about that, I want to make sure we're keeping focused on that. And I think that's important for two reasons. One of our recommendations certainly can be that we don't move forward with allowing it, right? So that could be certainly one recommendation. But another recommendation could be that we do allow it. And if we do allow it at the retail liquor stores, then what would that look like? And so I think one way we can frame this is we can look at, so what would that look like in statute? And if we're thinking about how it might be constructed in statute, there's probably two broad categories. One, what would be the language? What would the language look like that allowed for it? And that might be very simple. And then, what other components to the statute do we want to have in there to give the state licensing authority some ability to do some rulemaking on some of the other things we talked about? So recognizing we already have one recommendation on the table, which is not to not allow it. Can we move on to the one that talks about what it would look like if we were to allow it? So one category, what's the general language in 407, and then what is the language that then we would that'd be the first part, and the second part is what areas we want to give state licensing authority rulemaking on. Any thoughts on that? Thank you, Adam. What do you think?
I'm not going to be the first.
How about you guys? Thoughts? If it's going to be in statute as a recommendation, what would you guys want to say?
I think the problem that we ran into was kind of back to what you started with, is there were statements being made about things outside of the statutory mandate, but if the place the group wants to go is to say, well, we only want to allow growlers if lemonade stands and hot dog carts give them too, then our suggestion was we shouldn't pursue it further in this working group. I guess if other people have changed their view on that, maybe we could revisit it, but it seems like this probably just isn't going to go anywhere.
Well, I think you ought to require employees only be allowed to fill the growler, right?
Well, so before we get into that, because that kind of gets into the state licensing authority thing, it's a really good point. But I'm going back to the recommendation or the statutory language, which says we shall make recommendations. So are we saying that our recommendation is that it shouldn't be allowed?
That's what we're saying now, I think.
Yep. That's what we're saying now.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? You guys are running this growler conversation, but Patrick, did you have any more that you want?
Yeah, I'm neutral in this one.
Yeah, write it down quick.
Consensus, liquor store shouldn't have growlers in this study group's recommendation.
Okay. All right. I think so we're gonna have to have a recommendation on that. We'll start working on some language that'll make it into the report that we can have designed for you guys. So with that, I guess I'm gonna yield the rest of my time back to Patrick, because he had some stuff he wanted to revisit. Bless you. I can start eating again, Jim.
So, two things, well, probably more than two, but first thing is if you have not signed up on the sign-up sheet, please do. Make sure we get record of everybody here, because there were some latecomers that didn't get on the audio. So please, and probably some people who we couldn't hear on the audio, so please make sure that you get on the sign-up list so we can say you were here. You're not a ghost, right? Second of all, talking about next year. We published a meeting schedule for next year. It's on our website. It was also given to you by an email with the minutes or the agenda here. Next month in January, let's start formulating some recommendations. As a part of the things that we will be sending out is a recommendation template. And I would love to have maybe CLBA and to maybe fill one of those out for the growler recommendation. Okay. Anyone else can do that as well. So we're going to start that process. Try to put some of this pen to paper. On the 3-2 issue, I may be sending more information out to get some more conversation going. I know sometimes in a crowd like this, people aren't going to talk as much as they would maybe, but we really need to push this issue and get some resolution. We don't have to. Again, you're able to, as a group, decide that there's two different camps here, and that's what the recommendation going forward is. We don't really have a consensus recommendation, but there's option A, option B, and maybe even option C. That's fine. From that point, it is what it is. So I might push the envelope a little bit and get more discussion going in writing. So with that said, is there anything else that we need discussed here today on any one of these three subgroups? Did you like the format, 3 hours, and the other ones are going to be 4 hours? I think we have a little more time there. We don't have to take it all, but we're scheduled from 1 to 5 on a Friday afternoon.
Every Friday.
What?
Well, nothing changes from Fridays, most retailers are.
Yeah, that ship has sailed, so it's going to be on Fridays at 1 o'clock. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Thanks everybody for coming. Definitely have a happy holiday. We'll see you after the new year.